There you go. The recording has started. We welcome everyone. Good morning, good day to everyone, depending on who is watching when. Our topic today with Valerie is a continuation of the previous topic related to the calculation of annual human cycles. And before we start this topic, I will quickly make a small announcement. Valerie and I have just made a Telegram chat. In the description below this video, you can follow the link and you will see the chat rules there. In principle, this chat was created so that we could respond to your messages faster, so that we would not send each other your comments, feedback about working with wands, about some other points that you emphasized from previous videos. Therefore, it will be faster this way. Well, today we have a concrete, practical, one might say, lesson. We will count on it. Consider, one might say, the mathematics of human life. Valera, I give you the floor then.
Well, the topic is really interesting. The topic relates to a very important section in general in the life of the universe and in human life, first of all. Because I hope those who listen to us regularly have repeatedly encountered the fact that I emphasize this very important relationship, this principle of anthropomorphism, that is, man is a projection of God.
Этот принцип антропоподобия, то есть человек является проекцией Бога.
We are his little cells. And on the one hand, this idea certainly pleases people, sets them up in a certain way, but I would like your neural networks to work more actively. Logic is important here, extremely important. And in this case, it consists in the fact that you just think about it. If each of you is a projection of God, created according to a single genetic course with Him, as all ancient texts say, it means that you have the potential of the Creator in you.
По единому с ним генетическому коду, о чем говорят все древние тексты, то это означает, что в вас заложен потенциал Создателя.
And when you think or have thought about who the Creator is and sometimes fantastic thoughts, ideas about His eternal existence, about His power, and about the possibilities that He possesses, you immediately remember that you are genetically similar, and you have all these possibilities.
Сразу вспоминаете о том, что вы генетически подобны, и все эти возможности у вас есть.
And these are the possibilities you can uncover in yourself. Naturally, first you need to understand, you need to realize that who you are or who you really are. And in this regard, I will just briefly mention that all your main problems in life are connected with the fact that you rate yourself very low. You don't understand who you are. Because if you understood who you are, the feeling of joy it would overwhelm you every day from morning to evening. A sense of responsibility, a desire to learn more and more about yourself, and life, of course, immediately acquired a different meaning and a different color. But also in this regard, I would like to reiterate a very important point. It consists in the fact that we must, well, I will try to voice this word so that you understand, that in any case you have the right to choose. But it would be good for you to realize who God really is. And many years ago, when I was studying and working on ancient texts, trying to understand what they are talking about in general, one of the most important thoughts, considerations that clearly arose in front of me is the idea that the one who created our universe is not the last instance. And this world is infinite, but now we are not going to talk about infinity and what is beyond the horizon, behind the curtain. That our Creator, the one who created us, and in accordance with genetics which we exist and develop, He too is mortal. But here the concept of death takes on an entirely different color.
тоже смертен, но здесь понятие смерть приобретает совершенно иную окраску.
Rather, here is the concept of death. When you realize what it is, you begin to understand the greatness of the universe and rejoice that everything is arranged like this, and thank God that this is what we call death exists. But I am leading you to the idea that the Creator is also evolving.
Создатель тоже эволюционирует.
And it evolves through us. He observes the world through us, through our eyes.
Он наблюдает мир через нас, через наши глаза.
And this is why, well, if I may say so, his game is connected, although I don't really like this word, but nevertheless. When you read the classics, and you read the classics, and you read the classics before you listened to us solely. So you already have a peculiar setup, and the concept of this universal, but it is genetically very deeply written in you somewhere. And it will take us some time to transform this thought into the understanding that the Creator observes the world through us. He moves you from one time to another, from one space to another.
Трансформировать как бы эту мысль в понимание, что Создатель через нас наблюдает мир, Он перемещает вас из одного времени в другое, из одного пространства в другое.
And once again, I emphasize and repeat that through your eyes he observes the world, which means that he is improving through you. In this regard, your life begins to take on a completely different meaning. And we will return to this idea more than once in our other meetings when we discuss other very important issues. And now let's take the next step, and the idea is that if the Creator is in the environment where he exists, develops and self-recognizes, then this means that there are laws and principles of a higher order that he needs to take into account on the path of self-knowledge and self-perfection.
Более высокого порядка, которые ему нужно учитывать на пути самопознания и самосовершенства.
And one of the most important principles is the principle of the cycle. In other words, the world that surrounds us is alive, and in our daily life, even at the most primitive level, we noticed that the day is divided into two main components. It is night.
День у нас делится, на две основные составляющие. Это ночь.
And the day is an active phase and a passive phase.
Пассивная фаза.
The year is divided into four components.
Составляющих.
In other words, everything around has a certain rhythm, a certain principle of the cycle. And here it is very important to be aware, as it were, that if spring suddenly comes, and everything explodes with greenery in the spring, everything begins to grow, become more active. This means that this is the period when energies come into the world that stimulate the development of the organism, stimulating the development of the whole living person, that is, a certain flow of life energy. Then summer, it can be imagined as a certain period when we transform the received energy. The fruits appear. By autumn, the plants are already bearing fruit. They are ready to give offspring and animals. That is, the whole world then goes into winter. This is the relaxation phase, the sleep phase, the phase of transition from one state to another. This is a very important thought, from one state to another. And it's all subject to a certain cycle. And here it is very important to clearly understand when the flow of this energy begins in order to prepare in a certain way, to enter it. And our life with you, whether we want it or not, whether we are aware of it or not. We go through such phases during our life, considering which we can improve ourselves very effectively. or
либо
skip these phases,
пропустить эти
and when the
фазы,
consciousness is ready to
когда
realize and
сознание
take some
уже
very
не
important
готово к
steps,
тому,
we
чтобы
will simply miss the
осознать и
time.
совершить какие-то очень важные шаги, мы просто упустим время.
That is
Именно
why
поэтому
among the
среди
most
важнейших
important
принципов,
principles that have
которые
come to our
преследует
world
наш
today since ancient
сегодняшний
times
мир
are the principles
и
on which the
длинных,
universe is
это
built,
принципы,
one of which is
на
exactly
которых
the
строится
principle of
мироздание,
the
один из
cycle.
которых это как раз и есть принцип цикла. Вот.
And
И
today I'm
сегодня
going
я
to show
сейчас
you a small
покажу вам
presentation.
небольшую
I have
презентацию,
prepared some
готовил
interesting
кое-какие
drawings and photos.
интересные рисунки, фотографии.
This
Это
is
такая
such a
небольшая
small
будет
introductory
вводная
part
часть,
so that you
чтобы вы
understand
глубже
more deeply,
понимали, осознавали
realize the importance of the
важность
cycle
принципа цикла.
principle.
А
And then we
затем
will
мы
proceed to the
перейдем уже
calculation
к
of the
расчету
individual biological cycle, because it plays
индивидуального
a decisive role
биологического
in human life in many
цикла,
ways.
потому что он в жизни человека играет во многом решающую роль.
Because the events
События,
that come to us, they
которые
have a
к нам
certain
приходят,
cycle.
они имеют определенный цикл.
And
И
if
если
we
мы
realize when the phase of decline
осознаем,
begins, or when the
когда
phase of recovery
начинается фаза
begins,
спада,
then
или
we can
когда
predict
начинается
certain
фаза
events in our
подъема, и мы
life,
можем
prepare for them, and we will not face the
определенные
destructive
события в нашей
impact of
жизни
this
предсказать,
principle, or some events that come to us
подготовиться к
cyclically
ним,
because we are
и
prepared
мы
for
не
them.
столкнемся с тем разрушительным воздействием этого принципа или каких-то событий, которые циклически к нам приходят, потому что мы к ним оказываемся подготовлены.
The
Тот,
one who
кто
is informed is armed.
осведомлен, тот вооружен.
So
Поэтому
now,
сейчас,
Olenka, let's go
Оленька, давай
with
мы с
you,
тобой
give me the
встанем у
rights.
раба.
Now I'm
Сейчас
going
я
to connect mine.
подключу свой.
And so.
Так.
All right, is my screen visible?
Мгм. Ну все, виден мой экран?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Мгм.
Just a second. It's
Это всегда
always the
самая
hardest
такая
part to share.
непростая часть.
That's it. I forgot to
Поделиться.
click
Я
the
забыл,
share
как всегда,
button
нажать
as
кнопку
always.
поделиться. Теперь
Now I
везде
think
видно,
I've seen it,
правильно?
right?
Yes, there is.
Видно.
Great. That's it,
Всё,
here it
вот
is.
он.
This is the
Первая
first
заставка.
screensaver. Gifts for
Подарки для
you.
вас.
I try to
Постараюсь
choose such
подобрать такие
screensavers that
заставки,
best
которые
correspond to the
соответствуют
topic that we are going to
наилучшим
raise.
образом той теме, которую мы будем поднимать.
And
Итак,
so,
сегодня
today, we are
мы
going to talk
поговорим
about
о
calculating the
расчете
individual annual
индивидуального
biological
годового
cycle,
биологического
because
цикла,
during the
потому что в
year,
течение
it
года
is very individual,
очень
but in fact,
индивидуально,
we
но
go
по
through
сути
periods
мы
of rise,
проходим через периоды
stabilization, and
подъема,
decline of our energy
стабилизации и
activity.
спада нашей энергетической активности.
How
То,
energetic
насколько
we
мы
are affects our life,
энергетичны,
decision-making, in fact, everything.
влияет на нашу жизнь, на принятие решений, по сути дела, на все.
Whether we realize
Осознаем
it
мы
or
это или
not,
не осознаем,
but when
но
suddenly
когда
we find
вдруг
ourselves
мы
in a recession
оказываемся
zone
в зоне
and we don't want to
спада,
do
и нам
anything,
ничего не
well,
хочется
at a
делать, мы
primitive level, we
примитивным
don't
уровнем
do
ничего не
something,
делаем,
we don't
не
have time,
успеваем,
we
мы
lose.
теряем
In
все.
general, let's look at the
Давайте
cycle and the
посмотрим
principle of the
на
cycle
цикл,
through the
на
eyes of a
принцип цикла
priest.
глазами
Try to get acquainted with this
жреца,
extremely interesting
попробуем
topic, and
ознакомиться
I will give
с
you
этой
some
чрезвычайно
interesting
интересной
data.
темой.
Prepare your
И я вам
consciousness.
дам
So
кое-какие
that in the
любопытные
future, when
данные,
you encounter
подготовлю вас
something
по-новому для
related to
того,
the
чтобы в
principle of the
будущем,
cycle,
когда вы
your
будете
head will turn on.
сталкиваться
You
с
will
чем-то
analyze
имеющим
the incoming
отношение к
information
принципу
and
цикла,
develop
ваша
as
голова
these
будет
neural connections
включаться,
arise
вы
and
будете
become more
анализировать
complex in your
поступающую
head.
информацию, развиваться, и по мере возникновения и усложнения вот этих вот нейронных связей в голове,
And
и
it's not a
это
joke,
не
it
шутка,
really is.
это действительно
Your
так,
brain will become more
ваш
synchronized with
мозг
the universe,
будет
which
становиться
has the shape
более
of a brain.
синхронен,
And
что
there is an amazing
что
synchronization between the
Вселенная, которая
structures,
имеет
neural
форму
structures
мозга, и
of the
там
human brain and the
удивительная
universe,
синхронизация
after which we get
осуществляется между
access to understanding,
структурами, нейронными
awareness, and
структурами
information
мозга
of much
человека
higher
и
levels and
Вселенной,
planes.
после чего мы получаем доступ к пониманию, осознанию и информации гораздо более высоких уровней и планов.
So,
Итак,
let's start with the fact that
начнем с
naturally the
того,
knowledge about
что,
cycles and
естественно,
calendars in general,
знание
it came to our
о
civilization a very, very long
циклах
time ago.
и вообще о календарях, оно пришло в нашу цивилизацию очень-очень давно.
And of
И,
course, it
безусловно,
was given
оно
to man, to our
было дано
civilization in
человеку,
general, by
нашей
representatives of,
цивилизации,
as I have said many times,
представителями, как я
a
уже много раз
civilization of a
говорил,
very high level of
цивилизации
development.
очень высокого уровне развития, это были
These were alien
инопланетные
civilizations that
цивилизации,
had passed their long
которые
evolutionary
по
path, recognized a
присвоить
lot, and with this
эволюционный
they came
путь,
to us,
многое
and shared with
познали,
us.
и с этим они пришли к нам и поделились с нами.
This
В
is the special
этом
specificity of our civilization,
особая
because it
специфика
happened
нашей
historically that our
цивилизации,
land was in this place.
потому что так сложилось исторически, что наша Земля оказалась на этом месте. Это
This
место
place is
очень
not very random.
уникальное.
It is
Она
located
находится
where a huge number of
там,
chronocorridors intersect.
где пересекается огромное количество хронокоридоров.
These
Это
are
такие
channels in the field
каналы
of time through which
поле-времени,
the transition
через
from one
которые
dimension or space
осуществляется
to
переход
another
из
space
одного
is carried out.
измерения или пространства в другое пространство. И вот
And
мы,
here we are, as you
как,
know,
знаете, как
as
в
we are at
устье
the mouth of a
реки
river, and ships are moving through
находимся.
this river,
И вот
through this
через эту
mouth,
реку,
where
через
our
это
city,
устье, где
our
стоит
planet
наш
Earth
город,
stands.
наша планета Земля, движутся корабли. Ну,
Drawing an
проводя
analogy,
аналогию, такие
merchant
торговые
ships,
корабли,
they
они,
naturally
естественно,
stop.
останавливаются.
They
Вот, они
replenish their
пополняют свои
stocks,
запасы,
solve
они
some
какие-то
issues,
вопросы
and then
решают, и
start moving
затем
on.
начинают свое движение дальше. В
Everything
космосе
happens in
происходит
space
все
in
ровно
exactly the same
таким
way,
же
and on
образом.
the one
С одной
hand, it is
стороны,
a plus that these
это плюс,
extraterrestrial
что сюда
civilizations that are at a
приходили и
higher level of
приходят эти
development have
внеземные
come here and are
цивилизации,
coming here.
находящиеся на более высоком уровне развития.
But
Но
this
в
has
этом
its
есть
own
и свой
colossal minus.
колоссальный минус.
It
Он
consists
состоит
in
в
the
том,
fact that,
что,
on
с
the
одной
one hand,
стороны,
many
у многих
civilizations that are at different
цивилизаций,
stages of
находящихся
development
на разных
have some
этапах
different points of
развития,
view on the path of
есть
evolution of a
некие
particular
разные точки
civilization, and
зрения
each of
на
them,
пути
in its own
эволюции
way,
той или иной
probably would
цивилизации.
like to participate in the
Вот, и
evolution of our
каждая из них
civilization.
по-своему, наверное, хотела бы поучаствовать в эволюции нашей цивилизации. И
And
вот
this
это
participation
участие,
probably
оно,
comes not so much from the
наверное,
inner
не столько
heartache for those who live here as from the thought
исходит из
that if you
внутренней такой
participate in the
душевной
life of this
воли
city,
за тех, кто
then this
здесь
city can
живет,
be made your vassal,
сколько
and
из той
someone's base will
мысли,
be
что
here.
если
And in general, they will
поучаствовать
create certain
в
positive
жизни этого
conditions for
города, то
themselves.
этот город можно сделать своим вассалом, вот, и здесь будет их чья-то база, и, ну, в общем, они будут создавать определенные позитивные условия для себя.
You
Вы
get
поняли
the
мысль,
idea
о
I'm
которой я
talking about.
говорю.
And
И,
of course,
конечно,
given the
учитывая
certain unwillingness of the
определенную
majority of people to
неготовность
realize this reality,
основной массы
to
людей
receive such a huge
к
amount of
осознанию этой
information
реальности,
that has
к
a different
приему такого
psycho-emotional,
огромного количества
socio-political charge,
информации,
then, of
имеющей
course,
разный
everything that happened to us
психоэмоциональный
happens
и
here. But
социально-политический заряд,
nevertheless,
то
we
тут,
will
конечно,
benefit
вот
from the
и
fact that
происходит
today,
все то, что
what was going
с
on
нами
here,
произошло, но тем не менее мы будем с вами сегодня извлекать пользу из того, что здесь происходило.
a
Это
fairly long
определенный
historical
исторический период
period of
времени, и
time,
вот тот
and this is the
этап,
stage that is important for
который для
us.
нас важен,
This is the
это тот
stage
этап, к
to which
которому
we are
мы с
tied to
вами
this civilization.
данные в
It began a
цивилизации
long time
привязаны.
ago.
Он начался достаточно давно,
We are
речь
not
идет
talking about
не
one
об
10,000
одном
years.
десятке тысяч лет.
In
На
fact,
самом деле нашу
interested
Землю
parties have been visiting our Earth
индустриализованные
for
стороны
more than
посещают
100,000 years, and
не
in my
одну
research,
сотню тысяч
I
лет,
have come
и в
across
своих
artifacts that say that yes,
исследованиях я
indeed,
сталкивался с
humanity did not
артефактами,
appear
которые
30
говорят
or
о том, что да,
40,000 years ago.
действительно,
As classical
человечество
science claims,
появилось не
humanoid
30
forms of
или
a
40
sufficiently
тысяч лет
developed
назад,
form lived
как
on the planet.
утверждает классическая наука. На планете жили гуманоидные формы, достаточно развитые формы.
And
100 тысяч лет,
100,000
и
years,
150, и
and
200, и
150,
250
and
тысяч лет
200,
уже
and
начали наблюдения,
250,000 years have
восстанавливая
already
здесь
begun
и
observing,
создавая здесь,
restoring
на
certain
планете
energy
Земля,
information
определенные
systems here,
энергоинформационные
or
системы,
creating them
как
here on
правило, они
planet Earth.
располагаются в
As a
горах.
rule, they are
Вот,
located
и
in the
через
mountains,
эти
and through these
энергоинформационные
energy
системы
information systems,
они
they observe
наблюдают
us,
нас, они
they observe
наблюдают
our
нашу
planet.
планету,
They
они
observe how
наблюдают
it
то,
develops
как
cyclic
она
processes,
развивается,
how and how they
циклические
affect the fate of the
процессы,
planet as
каким
a mother
образом, как они
organism,
влияют на
how these
судьбу
energies affect the evolution of
планеты
humanoid
как
forms and
материнского
other forms of
организма,
life.
как эти энергии влияют на эволюцию гуманоидных форм и прочих форм жизни.
In
То есть,
other
видите, это
words, you
очень
see, this is a very large-scale
масштабный
project.
проект,
This is
это
a very
очень
interesting
интересная
dependency that
зависимость,
they are
которая
insanely interested in,
истязуемо
and they are
интересует,
devoting quite serious
и они этому
expedition trips here
посвящают
to this.
достаточно
But now
серьезные
we will put
экспедиционные
ourselves in the
походы
center of
сюда.
attention,
Вот,
in the
но
center of
мы
our
сейчас
conversation.
поставим себя в центр внимания, в центр нашего разговора.
And here I am showing all kinds of calendars on this slide, and as I have already said, the difference between these calendars is that, firstly, being given by alien civilizations, these calendars performed a different role.
Будучи данными инопланетными цивилизациями, эти календари выполняли разную роль.
Today, we are going to talk about literally one role of the calendar, and then in the course of our further meetings, we will consider other functions of calendars in more detail.
В процессе наших дальнейших встреч мы будем рассматривать более подробно и другие функции календарей.
In other words, the main idea is that the calendar is a certain scheme that allows you to create a table of certain energy events that somehow affect the fate of planet Earth and the inhabitants of planet Earth, and of course, first of all, a humanoid form in life, because it is this form that is actively transforming the system of this planetary non-animals, namely people.
И на обитателей планеты Земля, и, конечно, в первую очередь гуманоидную форму жизни, потому что именно эта форма занимается активным преобразованием системы этой планетарной. Не животные, а именно люди.
And in this connection, I would like to read to you what the ancients knew about the concept of time. Because when we start talking with you about cyclicity, about the fact that there is a change of periods of the year, we naturally associate it with the dial, with the clock, the concept of time.
О том, что происходит смена периодов года, мы, естественно, связываем это с циферблатом, с часами, понятием время.
But our concept of time, the modern concept of time, it is flawed. In other words, we have practically no understanding. We take and here we divide the day into some equal parts, which we call hours, minutes, and seconds. We divide an hour into 60 fractions, a minute into 60 fractions, a second into 60 fractions, whereas in ancient times, they divided into 100 fractions, and so on and so forth. But I emphasize at least this small detail due to the fact that the share also plays a very important role. Where, at what point, the energy release has a peak of its activity, where this peak is declining, because all these details, as you will understand later, play not only an important, but in some ways a decisive role. So the ancients said the following about space and time. Space is a container of time. It is due to the course, the movement of time, that life in space is maintained. The passage of time is regulated by the established order. And time, following this order, updates all objects in space, changing them. This absolutely amazing formulation is surprisingly accurate, and for me it is interesting because literally in 5 sentences those who wrote, put an idea worthy of a single thick book.
Те, кто написал, вложили мысль, достойную ни одной толстенной книги.
But we will come back to the concept of time, and with concrete examples in our lives, I will show and explain to you what time is. Because I have already said and mentioned this, too, our evolutionary next most important step will be connected not just with the awareness of what time is, but with the awareness of physical processes. That is, the physics of time itself, and when it begins to actively develop, we will have access to an understanding of the structure of the fields of time. The chronocorridor to the transition zone from one dimension to another.
И когда это начнет активно развиваться, мы с вами получим доступ к пониманию структуры полей времени, хронокоридоров, зон перехода из одного измерения в другое.
But the most important thing is that we will get access to our past. And when we can see this past with you and evaluate the events that preceded our current state, we will begin to form a real history, not written there by Schlieser and Bayer, well, with them, sorted out in everything.
нашей, так сказать, вот сегодняшней, нашему сегодняшнему состоянию, мы начнем формировать настоящую историю, не написанную там Шлёцером и Байером, ну и же с ними, перевранную во всем.
In other
То есть любой
words,
человек, который
anyone who is
занимается
engaged in one
так
way
или
or
иначе
another in the
историей,
history and
анализом
analysis
событий,
of events is faced with the
сталкивается с тем,
fact
что наша
that
реальная
our real
история,
history was
она была
different.
другой.
What is
То, что
taught at
преподают
school is
в
not
школе,
true,
это
to put it mildly.
неправда,
That
мягко
is,
говоря.
well,
То есть
how
мы
can we
как
build the
можем
building of
построить
our future civilization,
здание нашей
our life
будущей
positively, if we
цивилизации,
initially
нашей
have false
жизни
information?
позитивно, если мы изначально обладаем ложной информацией.
Accordingly,
Соответственно,
why are these calendars important to humanity?
почему, вопрос этот, почему эти календари важны человечеству?
And
И вот
here
здесь
I
я
show at
показываю
least
хотя бы
just 3
просто
different
3
calendars.
разных календаря.
I
Я
specially
специально
drew
такую
this picture
картинку
for
для вас
you, where I
нарисовал,
show one
где
calendar in the left
показываю
corner,
в
another in the
левом
center. There is a
углу
Mayan calendar.
один календарь, в центре другой, там майянский календарь. Это
These are
разные
different systems.
системы.
And
И
when
когда
historians study
историки
these calendars,
изучают
these finds,
эти
they, thank
календари, эти
God,
находки,
have recently begun to
они, слава
associate
богу, в
them with the
последнее
stars,
время все-таки
with a
начали
certain
связывать их
position of
со
the stars,
звездами, с
with a certain
определенным
connection of a
положением
certain
звезд,
event
то
with the
есть с
calendar,
определенной
with star maps. Because the
прямой
cosmos, this
связью этого
cosmic clock,
события с календарем,
astronomical,
со
they
звездными
go quite
картами,
accurately,
потому
and with the help
что
of this stellar
космос,
calendar,
эти вот
you can
космические
record dates
часы
that are tens or
астрономические,
even hundreds of thousands of years
они
away
ходят
from us.
достаточно точно, вот, и с помощью этого звездного календаря можно записывать даты, отстоящие от нас на десятки, а то и на сотни тысяч лет.
But this
Но
is in
это в
principle.
принципе.
Here,
Вот. Хотя
although in the
в
case of our
случае с
planet
нашей
Earth,
планетой Земля
everything is not so
все не
simple
так просто,
because there were
потому что
asteroid falls.
были
There were
падения
displacements
астероидов,
of our planet Earth
были
from its orbit,
смещения
there were
нашей планеты
changes in
Земли
the
со
speed
своей
of time,
орбиты,
there were a lot of
были
things. And we
изменения
still
плотности
have to
течения
figure it out a
времени,
little
много
bit.
чего было, и нам еще предстоит в этом немножко разобраться.
But
Но
returning to the
возвращаясь к
calendars, and
календарям,
again I remind you that the
и
calendars were
опять-таки напоминаю
absolutely
вам,
different,
что
which is what researchers, classical
календари были
Egyptologists,
разные,
for example,
абсолютно,
or
с чем
those
и
who deal with the Mayan
сталкиваются
culture face.
исследователи
But we will
классической
mainly
египтологии,
revolve
те,
around
там, или те,
Egyptian
кто занимается
calendars,
культурой
Egyptian
майя.
knowledge,
Но мы
because it is
будем
the
с вами
most
в основном
scientific. It has
вокруг
been preserved in the
египетских
most holistic
календарей
form,
египетского
in a
знания
form that can
крутиться,
be
потому
studied.
что
So
оно
very useful
наиболее
points can be
научно,
extracted
оно
from this
сохранилось в
knowledge.
наиболее целостной форме, которую можно изучать, вот, и извлекать из этого знания очень полезные моменты. Вот,
Most
в
recently,
основном
the
в
scientific
последнее
world,
время
studying calendars, talks about their
ученый мир,
binding to the
он,
periods of the year,
исследуя
to the fact that
календари,
there are
говорит о
so-called
их
agricultural
привязке
calendars.
к периодам года, к тому, что вот есть календари, так называемые сельскохозяйственные,
Of course,
безусловно,
this is partly
отчасти
true,
это
and
правда,
such
эти
calendars are
календари
important,
важны,
but these are calendars,
но
let's say,
это
for
календари,
primitive
скажем
enough
так,
use, for general use,
для
for creating
примитивного,
certain
так сказать,
economic
использования,
conditions
для общего
and the possibility
использования,
of our
для
civilization to
создания
exist.
определенных
But,
экономических
in the
условий
life of
и
a priest, these
возможности нашей
calendars,
цивилизации
obtained from
существовать,
the hands
но
of
в
Nifer,
жизни
in
жреца
Acts, they performed a very special role.
эти календари, полученные из рук неферов или нунаков, они выполняли совершенно особую роль.
In
В
particular,
частности, вот
here on the
здесь
right,
справа
I
я
show
вам
you the so-called
показываю
Dendera
так
zodiac.
называемый
Although its true purpose is the
дендерский
so-called
зодиак,
catastrophic zodiac of the Egyptian
хотя
temple, and which we today
его
call the Bender
истинное
or Dendera
предназначение – это
zodiac.
так называемый катастрофный зодиак египетского храма Иун-Танычет, который мы на сегодня называем Дендера или Дендерский зодиак.
This
Вот
calendar is
это
very interesting.
календарь очень любопытный. Вот. Он,
If
если
we,
вы
of
его,
course, impose
естественно,
a
так мы
clock
его
on it
наложим
like
часы
this, on the main
на
central
основную
part,
центральную
this is a
часть,
sphere.
это сфера. Вот
Above
над
us,
нами же
we see the
невидимое небо,
sky,
и когда
and
мы
when we look
смотрим
at
на
the
небо
sky around
вокруг
us,
себя,
then
то,
naturally we have the
естественно,
feeling
у
that
нас
this sky
возникает
is hanging over
ощущение,
us.
что
And it is
это
easier
небо
for us to
начинает нам
imagine it as
напоминать
a kind of
просто
sphere.
представить его как некую сферу, и
And
вот
on
на
this
этой
sphere,
сфере
there are some
какие-то
images,
изображения,
some
какие-то
constellations,
созвездия
in
для
order
того,
to
чтобы
record
записать
information about what is
информацию
happening in space.
о том, что
This is the
происходит
most
в
relevant
космосе.
scheme.
Вот такая схема, она наиболее актуальна.
And if
Если
we
вот мы наложим
superimpose a
их на дат,
dial,
то мы
then we
начинаем
begin to understand
понимать,
that
что
yes,
да,
in time, Using a certain scheme, we can rhythmize these events, tie them to some kind of rhythm, and create a system with which to predict some future events.
Создать систему, с помощью которой предсказывать какие-то будущие события.
This calendar is, as I have already mentioned, a catastrophic zodiac. It is represented in the Egyptian temple in Dendera by 5 calendars. In other words, these are round calendars. This is this linear calendar. And this is done because, in this way, the information that is embedded in these calendars cannot be reflected in any one calendar. It can't, it doesn't work. And in order for the information recorded in such an amazing, unusual way to be understandable to people through the centuries, to subsequent generations, and possibly through millennia, it is necessary to write down the information like this in a multivariate way. And, of course, there were several more papyri in the Dender version. And they described, they were kind of instructions on how to read this correctly. Calendar.
И которые описывали, они были своеобразной инструкцией к тому, как правильно читать данный календарь.
Moreover, the calendar, which depicts events that have occurred in our solar system, and of course in connection with the planet Earth, because the solar system, in which there are quite a large number of cosmic bodies of different sizes, is a single system. Everything is interconnected here, and therefore, consider the events taking place on Earth and happening to a person outside of what it can't happen in the solar system. It's wrong.
Вне того, что происходит в Солнечной системе, нельзя, это неправильно.
Therefore, astrology and other scientific disciplines have appeared that are trying to draw some connections, parallels, between what is happening to us on Earth and what is happening in space. Here is another example of how it was stated on the Denderian zodiac. Here, as I have already mentioned, the events are recorded for some reasons, and what is described on this calendar, in this text. So here is recorded a period of at least somewhere in 40,000 years. But there is an assumption that there is more. An assumption because it has not yet been fully worked out. That is, the scheme of recording information here is obvious. Svetlana Nikolaevna Pavlova, our saint, Petersburg researcher, and, in my opinion, an outstanding researcher, she realized the principle of writing text on the Ender zodiac. This is the principle of a freeze frame, when a sequence is recorded, but photographically, that is, a certain event is photographed. We can imagine, then this event is put on the dial of cosmic time, and in a certain way we can calculate when this event occurred. What events occurred?
Определенным образом мы можем посчитать, когда это событие произошло, какие события происходили.
In other words, this is another version of the calendar. It is not an agricultural calendar. It is a calendar of certain global cosmic events that have occurred in the solar system. But for the priests, the calendar and the calculation system carried another very important meaning. For us, it will be the main one in our conversation with you today. This is the knowledge that the universe, which is the body of the Absolute, as I have already mentioned a couple of times, is located inside a much more subtle, developed organism. That is, the universe itself is in a certain environment. That allows our universe to develop, and all this it is subject to certain cycles, rhythms, that is, there are certain energy flows that affect the evolution of all life on Earth in a certain way.
И все это подчинено определенным циклам, ритмам, то есть существуют некие энергетические потоки, которые определенным образом влияют на эволюцию всего живого на Земле.
And here is a clear understanding of when, where and at what time this subtle energy flow passes. This knowledge allows you to prepare. Enter this flow, let's say, tune into it, take this energy, and then allow the body to transform this energy inside itself. Perceive it.
Настроиться на него, взять эту энергию, а затем дать возможность организму эту энергию как бы внутри себя трансформировать, воспринять.
And then amazing transformations begin in the human energy system. But one more important thought that I would like to outline, although we have talked about it to one extent or another, is that our evolution and the main specific genetic programs are recorded or pre-installed in our genetics, related to the activity and development of the possibility of hormonal the systems are also all tied to cycles. To a certain moment when the hormonal system turns on, when certain garbage genes, as experts in these fields say, begin to have a certain effect on the hormonal system, that is, the transformation process is underway. And we are evolving very, very quickly.
Гормональная система включается, когда определенные на сегодня пока еще мусорные гены, как говорят специалисты в этих областях, начинают оказывать определенное воздействие на гормональную систему. То есть идет процесс преобразования, и мы очень-очень быстро эволюционируем.
That is, if we want to live with you for a long time, live consciously, go through the stages of controlled reincarnation, and many, many other things that actually make a person, a particle of a full-fledged particle of God. That's with all the amazing possibilities. In other words, we need to know about these cycles, we need to use this knowledge in our daily life. Because I'm going to give a special kind of example now. I think he will tell you a lot. These opportunities open up fantastic prospects for us. The calculation of these energy events allows, as I have already mentioned, to connect to special energies that play a key role in human evolutionary development. An example is knowledge. It is ancient knowledge. I named it for my English-speaking readers Cosmic Baby. I don't really like this name myself, so, well, let's call it a cosmic child or a child of the universe. What is it, and, in fact, what am I talking about? Look, in the life of any woman, there is firm one, roughly speaking, well, a maximum of, let's say, a maximum of 5 days, in which you can conceive a child, and this child will be outstanding in all respects.
Вы можете зачать ребенка, и этот ребенок по всем параметрам будет выдающимся.
Smart, healthy, brilliant. That is, everything is in the most excellent shape. This is the day when your internal biological rhythms in a certain way, where the annual individual biological cycle will play a decisive role in many ways. So, when this cycle is superimposed on the cycles of the sun, the cycles of the moon, where the cycles of other cosmic influences, and energy comes to Earth with a very special potential, a special charge. So, if at this moment, the moment of conception, and the moment of conception is the moment when what we call orgasm takes place. So, this is a special energy release. There are 3 events in the life of any person that are as energetic as possible, and that play a decisive role in the life of any person. This is the moment of birth, this is the moment of death, and this is an orgasm. So, in this case, the moment of orgasm, this powerful
данном
release of
случае
internal energy,
момент
superimposed on the energy
оргазма в
flows of
этот
the universe, makes a powerful bookmark.
мощный
And your future child
вывод
literally seems to be imprinted
внутренней
in a certain
энергии
place of the cosmic flow of time, where a
накладывает
special kind of
на
cosmic flows merge in
энергетические
time and
потоки
space, that
Вселенной,
is, your child will be constantly
делает
on a special
мощнейшую
kind of energy
закладку,
recharge.
и ваш будущий ребенок в буквальном смысле как бы отпечатается в определенном месте космического течения времени, там, где во времени, в пространстве осуществляется слияние особого рода космических потоков, то есть ваш ребенок будет постоянно на особого рода энергетической подпитке.
Accordingly,
Соответственно,
here is the preparation for the conception of a
подготовка
child in ancient Egypt,
к
where the birth of
зачатию
a child
ребенка
was
в Древнем
considered as the
Египте,
arrival on
где
earth of another reincarnation of God.
рождение ребенка рассматривалось как приход на Землю очередной реинкарнации Бога.
This is a very
Это очень
important
важная
thought.
мысль. Они
They
понимали,
understood that
что
each person
каждый
is an
человек — это
individual, and each
индивидуальность,
person
каждый
is a
человек — это
projection of God on
проекция
earth.
Бога на Земле.
And
И
this
вот
preparation
вот эта
began with
подготовка,
calculating
она
certain
начиналась
dates
с
for the passage
вычисления
of special energy
определенных
flows in
дат
an annual
прохождения
cycle.
особых энергетических потоков в годовом цикле.
This
Это
was the
была
most important and
важнейшая
sacred
и
part of knowledge,
священная часть
obtained in
знания,
ancient times from the hands
полученная
of
в
these
глубокой
gods,
древности из
who
рук
in fact were
высоких
representatives of a very
богов,
highly developed alien
которые на самом
civilization.
деле были представителями очень высоко развитой инопланетной цивилизации.
So the
Вот
gods, so far
боги,
we call them that,
пока мы
because on the
называем их
one
так,
hand,
потому что, с
it is
одной
a
стороны,
convenient
это
concept,
удобное такое
because
понятие,
that is
потому что
how our
мы их
ancient
так
ancestors
воспринимали,
perceived them,
и
and when they
наши
perceived
древние
them as
предки,
gods, every word
когда
they
они
uttered,
воспринимали их
every
как
fragment
богов,
of knowledge
каждое
they gave,
слово,
was
которое
perceived by
они
people openly,
произносили,
and was perceived so
каждый
deeply,
фрагмент
that the
знания,
information
который
flow
им
itself,
давали,
going along with consciousness,
воспринимался
it had a
людьми
transformative effect on
открыто
a person.
и воспринимался настолько глубоко, что сам информационный поток, идущий сознанием вместе, он оказывал трансформирующее воздействие на
A
человека. Человек
person
менял
changed his
свое
attitude to this
отношение
knowledge,
к этому
changed his
знанию,
attitude to
менял
life,
отношение к
changed in
жизни,
many ways the
менял
rhythm
во
of his
многом
life,
ритм своей
the
жизни,
order of his
порядок
life.
своей жизни.
And
И
this
это
led to very
приводило к
interesting
очень
results.
интересным результатам. Так
The
вот, боги
gods
учили,
taught
что
that the
за
health,
здоровье,
giftedness, outstanding quality,
одаренность,
and successful future of a
выдающиеся
child
качества
depend
этих
on the influence of
сверхбудущих
certain
ребенка
planetary energy and
зависят
cosmic
от
factors.
влияния определенно планетарных энергетических и космических факторов.
And
И
these
эти
factors are
факторы
superimposed on the
накладываются
biorhythms of
на
parents
биоритм
and on the biorhythm of the
родителей
unborn child.
и на биоритм будущего ребенка.
This is
Это
such a
такая
very
очень
complex
сложная,
but important
но
dependence
важная
that must be
зависимость, которая
calculated
должна быть
and taken into account.
вычислена и учтена.
And if we
И
do it this
если
way,
же мы
then
это
our child
делаем
will be brilliant,
именно так,
outstanding.
то наш ребенок будет гениальным, выдающимся.
But in
Но
our daily life,
в
when we
нашей повседневной
conceive, we
жизни,
don't think about it.
когда
We
у
don't
нас
know
происходит
anything about it.
зачатие, мы об этом не задумываемся, мы об этом ничего не знаем
And I
из-за
must
того,
say
что
that there
есть
are
такие
cycles when
циклы,
children cannot be conceived in any
когда
case.
детей ни в коем случае зачинать нельзя.
For
Например,
example, to conceive a child
зачинать
should not
ребенка
be on the waning
нельзя
moon.
на убывающей луне.
And we don't
Мы
even
даже
think
не
about it.
задумываемся.
And
Поэтому,
so,
когда эти
when all
ситуации
these
нами не
factors are not
учтены,
taken into account by us, I apologize.
прошу прощения,
Well,
ну вот
it turns
получается
out that
то,
it
что
turns out.
получается,
And at
и у вас в
best,
лучшем
let's
случае
say we have
сложились
some
такие
interesting children who are strong in
интересные
mathematics
дети,
or strong
которые
in
сильны в
music in one
математике,
thing.
сильны в музыке, в чем-то одном.
That's good on the one
И
hand.
это, с одной стороны, хорошо.
There are
Есть
ordinary
обычные дети,
children.
есть
There
не
are not
совсем
quite
удачные
successful children.
дети.
That's
Вот
all
все
due
это
to the
связано
lack of
с
this
отсутствием
knowledge.
этого знания.
We'll
Мы к
come
этому
back
еще
to him,
вернемся.
and something I will try to teach
И
you how
в
to do
чем-то
it
я
right.
постараюсь вас научить, как это правильно делать. Вот.
But in
Но
order
для
for your
того, чтобы
understanding of the
ваше
necessity and importance of cycles to
понимание
be deepened,
необходимости
now
ваших
we will
циклов
gradually come to the moment
было
when I will tell
углублено,
you how to
вот
correctly calculate
мы
this
сейчас
annual biological cycle,
постепенно
and you will have a very
подойдем
important tool in your hands.
к моменту, когда я вам расскажу, как правильно рассчитать вот этот годовой биологический цикл. Ну и у вас в руках появится очень важный инструмент. Так вот,
So, going back to what we have just said,
возвращаясь к
in
тому, что
order
сейчас
to
говорил,
realize this
для
potential,
того, чтобы
a person
реализовать эту
must be in a
потенциальную возможность,
harmonious energy interaction with the universe,
человек должен
which is the
находиться
body of the Creator.
в гармоничном энергетическом взаимодействии со Вселенной, являющейся телом Создателя.
So
Так
the
вот, в
algorithms
основу
for calculating the dates of
алгоритмов
conception were
расчета дат
based on
зачатия
biological,
положены были
bioenergetic,
биологические,
and
биоэнергетические
cosmoplanetary
и
cycles, as well
космопланетарные
as
циклы,
resonances
а
linking the
также
man-universe-Earth
резонансы,
system into a
связывающие
single complex and harmonious system.
систему человек, Вселенная, Земля в единую, сложно подчиненную и гармоничную систему.
That's how I'd pass out.
Я бы выразился.
Today,
Вот
I will illustrate,
сегодня
or
я
begin to
проиллюстрирую
illustrate, the
или
idea
начну
that I want to
иллюстрировать
convey to you using this calendar.
ту идею, которую хочу до вас донести, вот с использованием вот этого календаря.
This is an
Это
absolutely
совершенно
amazing
обычный
calendar.
календарь, он
It
был
was found in the
найден
burial
по
of a
имени
priest, an architect named Sinmut.
жреца, архитектора по имени Синмут.
It
Это был
was the architect of Hatshepsut, the pharaoh's woman.
Hatshepsut, женщины фараона.
So when
Вот когда
Egyptologists evaluate and study this curious
египтологи
calendar
по
to this
теме
day,
оценивают
and you see how the circles
изучают
here are
этот
segmented in a certain way, there are
совершенно
names.
календарь, а вы видите, как здесь кружки определенным образом сегментированы, есть названия.
In other
И мы
words,
начинаем
we are
видеть
starting
что-то
to
такое
observe something
узнаваемое,
recognizable here.
наблюдать.
They
Они
tie these calendars
привязывают
to the
эти
northern
календаря к
sky, to the
северному
southern
небу,
sky,
там, к
to some
южному
stars.
небу, к каким-то
Again, linking it
звездам.
all with
Опять-таки
agricultural events
связывая
and
это
so on.
все с сельскохозяйственными событиями и так далее.
That,
Вот,
on
что,
the
с одной
one
стороны,
hand, is
правильно.
correct, of
Безусловно,
course.
это
This
все
all
имеет
takes
место
place,
быть.
but they,
Но
of course,
они,
do not see the
естественно,
most
не видят
important
самого
thing.
главного.
What is the most
Что здесь
important thing
самое
here?
главное? Вот смотрите,
Look,
внизу,
there are
с левой
gods,
стороны,
and 7 of them
боги,
at the bottom on the left side.
и их 7.
At
Сразу
once,
7
7 energy
энергетических
shells of a
человека,
person
имеющих
having
проекции
projections in the
в
physical
теле, это
body
органы
are the
эндокринной
organs of the
системы.
endocrine system. On
Вот
the
с
right
правой
side,
стороны
too,
тоже
everything is
все
about
про
the same.
это же.
But I
Но
want to draw your attention,
я хочу
first of
обратить
all,
ваше
to their
внимание,
head.
во-первых, на их голову. Обратите внимание, над
Overhead, there are
головами
red balls
идут вот
or
такие
circles.
красные шары там, или круги.
In
На
fact,
самом
this is
деле
this
это
energy
и есть
projection
вот
of
эта
the hypothalamus of
энергетическая
the pituitary
проекция
system.
гипофизарной системы.
This is
Это
a kind
некий
of energy clot.
энергетический
This is a
сгусток.
transition zone,
Это
which are
зона
located above the
перехода,
head of each
которая,
person.
собственно, находится над головой у каждого человека.
And it
И
is
вот
through
именно
this
через
transition
эту
zone that the
зону
human
перехода
brain and neural structures
мозг
communicate
и
directly with
нейронные
the
структуры
corresponding
человека
structures of the cosmos
связываются
and the universe.
напрямую с соответствующими структурами космоса и Вселенной.
Therefore,
Поэтому вот
everything in a person's
качество,
life
вот
depends on the
размера,
quality, on the
интенсивности
size, on the
данного
intensity of this energy
энергетического
formation above his
образования
head.
над головой в жизни человека зависит все.
So this
Так вот этот
calendar, it's
календарь,
actually about how to
он на
calculate
самом
certain
деле
cycles
про
for
то,
the effective development
как
on the one hand,
рассчитать
of this
определенные
formation
циклы
of
для
Ra, which in the
эффективного
Christian tradition is
развития,
called
с
a
одной
halo.
стороны, вот этого образования Ра, который в христианской традиции называется нимбом,
As you
как
like,
угодно,
each
у каждой
civilization has its
цивилизации
own
названия
names,
свои,
but
но
the essence
суть
does
от
not
этого
change
не
from this.
меняется.
In other
Этот
words, this
календарь, он
calendar
про
is
то,
about how a person can,
как
taking into account natural
человек
factors,
может,
achieve tremendous
учитывая
results in
естественные
self-development and
природные
directly,
факторы,
consciously contact
достичь
this universal
колоссальных
source of
результатов
information.
в
This
саморазвитии
divine
и
structure, after
напрямую,
which, as I have said
осознанно
many times, and
связаться
will
вот с
continue
этим
to say, a person's life
вселенским
changes
источником
dramatically, if
информации, с
not
этой божественной
fundamentally.
структурой, после чего, как я много раз говорил и буду говорить, жизнь человека меняется кардинально, если не принципиально.
That's why we
Поэтому
allocated from the calendar this
мы с
segment.
вами выделяем из этого календаря вот этот вот сегмент,
I show you
еще
once
раз
again
показываю,
how
как
we
мы
represent it and associate
его
it with the dial.
представляем и связываем с циферблатом.
Here,
Вот.
and
И
now we are
сейчас мы
moving on with
переходим
you
с
to what I
вами
actually did all
к
this
тому,
long
собственно, ради
introduction
чего
for.
я все это
This is the
длинное
calculation
введение
of your
сделал.
individual annual
Это
biological cycle.
расчет вашего индивидуального годового биологического цикла.
And
Итак,
so
еще
again,
раз.
this cycle plays a
Этот цикл
fundamentally
играет
important
в
role
вашей
in your
жизни
life.
принципиально важную роль.
This is
Это
a
цикл,
cycle that will
который
show those periods of the
покажет
year when your body is as
те
energetic as
периоды в
possible.
году,
when you are on the most
когда
effective
ваш
energy recharge
организм
from the Earth and
максимально
space.
энергетичен, когда вы находитесь на максимально эффективной подпитке энергетической со стороны Земли и космоса,
Immediately
сразу
looking ahead,
забегая
in the process,
наперед,
I will say
в
that in the
процессе,
process of
скажем, что
this
в
disclosure of
процессе
this knowledge, you will most
вот
likely pay attention to
этого
the fact that the period of birth and
раскрытия
conception of a
этого
child
знания
should be connected in a certain way
вы,
with
скорее
the
всего,
annual planetary
обратите
cycle.
внимание на то, что период рождения и зачатия ребенка должен определенным образом быть связан с годовым планетарным циклом.
In other
То есть у
words,
нас
we have
в
4
году
periods
есть
of
4
maximum
периода
energy activity of the
максимальной
planet Earth
энергетической
in a
активности
year.
планеты Земля. То есть
Planet
планета
Earth as
Земля
a
как
living
живой
organism
организм
also goes through
тоже
the stages
проходит
of
через
its
этап
increased
своей
energy,
повышенной
reduced energy.
энергетичности, пониженной энергетичности.
In other
То есть
words,
веду
I
я
am
вас к
leading you
тому,
to the
что
fact that
если
if children are
детей
conceived at a strictly
зачинать
defined time,
в строго
then being
определенное
born
время,
also in 9 months
то
at a strictly
рождаясь на
defined
свет
time, we will
тоже
be
через
able to
10 суток
synchronize
в
conception
строго
and birth
определенное
with the most
время,
energetic
мы
events in the life
сможем
of planet Earth.
синхронизировать
And this will
зачатие и
lead to the fact
рождение
that
с
every
максимально
special day in your child's life,
энергетичными
especially the period
событиями
during the
жизни
recession,
планеты
it will be
Земля.
fueled by the energy
И
of the
это
Earth.
приведет
That
к
is,
тому,
at the
что
moment when your body
каждый
is weak from the inside, it will
особый
lack
день
energy.
в жизни
You will
вашего
receive
ребенка,
energy from planet Earth,
особенно
which
период
will greatly
спада,
facilitate your existence.
он будет подпитываться энергией Земли, то есть в тот момент, когда ваш организм изнутри, он будет слаб, ему будет не хватать энергии, вы будете получать энергию от планеты Земля, что в значительной мере облегчит ваше существование.
So,
Итак,
now we turn to the
переходим теперь к
calculation.
расчету.
Now
Теперь
pay
внимание.
attention. Naturally, you
Естественно,
will then have a
что
recording of our
у вас
broadcast
в
in your
руках
hands,
потом
and you
будет
can listen
запись
to this
нашего
broadcast
эфира,
again
и
and
вы можете
again.
еще раз
Refresh your memory
переслушать
again, or see something
этот
else that
эфир,
seemed
еще раз
incomprehensible to you.
как бы освежить
But
в
we
памяти
decided to
или
take another
увидеть,
step in a conversation with
вспоминать
Olya.
то, что вам показалось непонятным, но мы в разговоре с Олей решили сделать еще один шаг
A
для
special
вас.
program will be
Будет
written for
написана
you.
специальная
Most
программа,
likely,
скорее
Olya
всего,
will
Оля
post this
разместит эту
program on her
видеосвязь, эту
website,
программу,
where
куда
in
в
the future
будущем
you
вы
or
или
your
ваши
friends
друзья
will be able to
смогут
log
зайти,
in,
ввести
enter
ваши
your birthday data,
данные по
and
дню
such an annual
рождения,
cycle will be
и такой
biologically
цикл
calculated for you.
годовой биологический будет для вас рассчитан.
This,
Это,
of course,
конечно,
will make your
облегчит
life
вашу жизнь, но
easier,
в тот
but at
момент
that
и в том
moment
месте,
or in
где у
that
вас
place where you will not have
доступа к
access
интернету
to
не
the
будет,
internet.
вот у вас
Here you will
будет
have the
знание о
knowledge of
том,
how to
как на
actually
самом
do it.
деле это
I
сделать. Я
took
вот взял дату
2507 2006 year.
25.07.2006 года.
The girl's
Зовут
name is Christina,
девушку
that is, a
Кристина, то
person
есть
quite
человек
young.
достаточно молодой.
And right
И
away, I want
сразу
to make
хочу
another very important
сделать
introductory
еще одно очень
remark
важное
that this
вступительное
calendar,
замечание,
it will
что
be
данный
uneven in
календарь,
time.
он будет во времени неравномерным, и что важно,
For a
для
young or healthy
молодого и
person, it will be
здорового
one.
человека
For
он
a
будет
very, very
один,
elderly, old
для
person, or a sick
очень-очень
person.
пожилого
And it doesn't
человека
matter
или
if a person is
больного
even
человека,
young,
тут уже не
but very
важно,
sick,
если человек
then
даже
the
может быть
calculation
очень сильно
parameters of
болен,
such a calendar will be
то
different.
параметры расчета такого календаря будут другими. Вот.
And today,
И
we
мы
are going
сегодня
to
будем
talk
говорить
with
с
you
вами
only
только
about
о
calculating the
расчете
biological cycle for a healthy person.
биологического цикла для здорового
I'm
человека. Я
just
просто
going to mention what the
обмолвлюсь, в
difference
чем
is in the
разница
course of our
по
conversation with you,
ходу нашего
and
с
this
вами
explanation of
разговора
how
и
to
вот этого
calculate it correctly.
объяснения, как его правильно рассчитывать.
Here,
Вот.
that
То есть у
is,
вас будет
you will have an
понимание, что это
understanding of
такое и
what
как
it is and
принимается
how this
этот
cycle
цикл. Но
changes,
в
but in the
будущем,
future,
еще раз
I remind you
напомню, у вас
again.
будет программа, и
You
вы
will have a
сможете вполне
program,
себе
and you will be
легко
able
и
to easily
быстро
and quickly
получить
get your
правильный
hands on the
расчет вашего
calculation of your annual
биологического
biological
цикла,
cycle,
учитывая вот
taking
эти
into
важные
account these
аспекты.
very important
Молод и
aspects,
здоров, я
young
очень
and
старый, я
healthy,
очень
either very
молодой.
old or very sick.
Итак,
So how can
значит,
how should we calculate
как
a
мы
given
должны
cycle?
рассчитывать данный цикл?
So,
Итак,
the starting
исходной
date
датой
for calculating the
для
annual
расчета
biological cycle is the date
биологического
of birth.
цикла годового является дата рождения.
Today, I
Сегодня
have
я уже
already said
сказал, что в
that
жизни
in the
любого
life of
человека
any person, In your life, in the life of your biological body, this date is a key one. That is the moment when you were born. Remember the three phases of maximum effective energy. This is birth, this is death and orgasm. So, the birth of the 25th of the 7th, 2006. We are putting this point here. Here it is shown here. Here it is. That is, the 7th month. It was we who broke the dial by hours and by months. We take the 7th month. Approximately here is the given number. And now, the first very important thought. In other words, an increase in your energy activity. This period of increase, when you enter the active phase, begins in a healthy person 2.5 months before your birthday. And on this dial, I showed this period with a green line, that is, 2.5 months. Now, after that, after your birthday, within 1.5 to 2 months, your overall bioenergetic state will stabilize. In other words, this upper sinusoidal phase, this energy rise, it is coming to its peak. And the peak is exactly the date of birth. Date of birth and 12-day cycle. That is, your peak is 12 days around the birthday. That is, 6 days before the birthday and 6 days after the birthday. This is the most energetic phase in your life during the year. After this maximum energetic phase, your overall bioenergetic state will stabilize within a month and a half. So you enter the usual, normal energy rhythm for the body. The phase of the energy decline is calculated as follows. We take with you the ascendant date, that is, the exact opposite date of your birth. We put a point. In this case, it will be just the very end of January. We have put an end to it. So the phase of decline begins a month and a half before the day of the ascendant, that is, until the day opposite to your birthday. And the peak of your decline is the same 12 days around the date of your birth. That is, there is an ascendant of the date of your birth. That is, 6 days before and 6 days after. After that, relaxation begins here. And in about a month, approximately for a healthy person, the phase of decline ends, and the body enters the normal phase energetically. In other words, we are stabilizing and going normally. Once again, I show here, as if separately, that the peak of the recession phase is the 12-day period around the student's day. That's 6 days before and 6 days after. Here in this regard, it is very important to emphasize that during the recession, the days of full moons will be more energetically beneficial for you. Naturally, this is where the moon will help you a little. Remember that during a downturn, you should save your strength. As a rule, it is at this phase, in the phase of decline, that health problems can begin if they are not monitored, or the body is not monitored at all. Treatment of the most serious diseases in the recession phase, especially in the groove of the peak of the recession, is not recommended. Because, most likely, if the operation is heavy, your energy system, your body will not cope. It is necessary to be clearly aware of this. And I think there are people among you who immediately noticed that just in the date or in the period of recession, as a rule, you could have had some health problems or some events in your life when you missed some kind of blow and something happened, which then negatively affected you and your family, perhaps your life.
В жизни, когда вы пропускали какой-то удар и что-то происходило, что потом негативным образом сказывалось на вас и на вашей семье, возможно, на вашей жизни.
Therefore, here you need to understand how it all works, take it into account, and prepare. Accordingly, during this period of decline, I recommend more often not to part, even with the wands of Horus, because they will energetically support your system.
Потому что они будут энергетически вашу систему поддерживать.
Also remember that during a downturn, any transformational practices that you engage in, they will not be effective enough.
Практики, которыми вы занимаетесь, они не будут достаточно эффективными.
In other words, it will be a period when the task set and the desire to achieve some result will most likely not succeed, precisely because you are on the basis of a recession.
Результата, скорее всего, не увенчается успехом именно потому, что вы находитесь на фазе спада.
During this period, as I said, it is better to walk more with the wands of Gore in your hands. If you live in appropriate conditions, where it is warm, it is better to walk barefoot. And in this way, you will gradually feed the system. This period, it will take you about 1.5 to 2, a maximum of 2.5 months, depending on what age, what condition you are in, after which you enter a stable phase. And then the lifting phase begins. You are in this phase, you can already solve some tasks that are more important for your spiritual development. If I just show that this kind of practice on the one hand will be extremely useful for you during a downturn, and what is important is closer to the water in a team. This will have a positive effect on you in a certain way. Here I specially showed people who bathe with wands. This is extremely important in order to maintain your system in the best possible condition. And also remember that the energetically correct thing to do during the period when your system is on the decline is to use the energy of trees. We have a pine tree. As you remember from our previous meetings, this is a tree that is practically active throughout the year. This is very important. The period of the lowest energy activity of the tree is indicated here, between 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but as a rule, we sleep at this time. The calculation of the cycle time of a person and a tree is carried out based on the rhythm of the sun, here, and not some other absolute rhythm there. Here, accordingly, at night at this time we sleep. I have designated this period, as a rule. I think none of you approach the pine tree at this time. But you can approach during a downturn, take energy, and this energy will improve your immunity, the protective functions of the body. And indeed, if you engage in the energy of trees, in particular pine trees, during the recession period regularly, then it will let you down. Classes before 9 o'clock in the evening are recommended, because otherwise, if you do this after 9, you will encounter a state of overexcitation, which you will then have to extinguish with the help of some practices. In general, you will experience a sharp surge in sexual activity, which on the one hand is kind of good, but always remember that the energy you receive is very important in a certain way connected with your evolution, the evolution of your capabilities. In other words, this interaction with the opposite sex should be carried out on time. There should be no overkill. One of the greatest problems that each of us faces, unknowingly, of course. This especially happens before or immediately after the wedding. I mean that so-called honeymoon, when people come off according to the full scheme.
Люди отрываются по полной схеме.
So the problem is that this energy that we receive during sexual intercourse is a special energy that we perceive as a man or a woman, and we have to transform it in a certain way. We will return to this practice separately. I think, Olenka, write down this moment by all means. This is the most important ancient practice. We will talk about it separately.
Yes, we have.
Yes, but the most important thing is that this energy that we receive, which comes with us to us together with a feeling of love, craving for each other, we must, first of all, preserve and develop this energy in ourselves. Now, there is a practice of developing this energy. Unfortunately, we are doing the exact opposite. We start hanging out there 2, 3, 4 times a day for a month. And when this energy suddenly disappears from us, subtle, most important, we then think, has love passed or what? No, we did everything wrong. And this is the most important chance that we are given, a chance after which, with the correct, competent use of this energy, the feeling of love, it will grow. And you suddenly realize that this feeling is cosmic, universal, all-encompassing over you.
Над вами, оно какое-то космическое, оно какое-то вселенское, всеобъемлющее.
This is a state and energy that will begin to change you so that at first you will even be surprised, but someone may be a little scared. I was a little scared at the time when it came to me, but this is a separate conversation. These are very important opportunities. So with this, remember, you have to be careful when the energy comes. And once again, I want to emphasize that during the practices, including here I specifically show, one of the most effective practices is walking barefoot with wands or jogging, which allow you to restore the metabolism in the body. The proportion of energy exchanges in the body when this powerful energy transformation occurs.
Когда происходит вот это мощнейшее энергетическое преобразование.
Here it is very important to take everything dosed, cyclically, competently in your life, transform, and then your life. It will certainly be transformed in many ways.
Трансформировать, и вот тогда ваша жизнь, она, безусловно, во многом преобразится.
And then you will be able to reproduce how it is to bring outstanding children to the color, and if you already have children, then there is knowledge of how to make your children as brilliant as possible, based on all the conditions in which we are. I think that we will also raise this topic with you. Here's how you can create and what conditions can be created, so that our child suddenly begins to evolve, not really suddenly. For this you need to create certain conditions and apply certain technologies. Everything that concerns spiritual development, effective spiritual development, is all technology. Remember this. These are technologies, these are energies, this is the law of the universe, this is the genetics of the Creator. And if we accept all these conditions, we realize them, and begin to apply knowledge, our life will change. At this point, I have outlined this section concerning the calculation of the annual biological cycle. There will certainly be questions, and Alechka made a chat today. She has already posted it on the internet. That is, you can contact your questions there on the chat, so then we will try to answer these questions, and, if necessary, we will make another broadcast dedicated to the topic of cyclicity and the annual biological cycle. In order for everything to settle down in your mind, everything was clear, and we were able to be where we need to be, especially if it needs to be done quickly.
особенно если это нужно быстренько,
Take a piece
взять
of
бумажку,
paper, a
карандаш,
pencil,
нарисовать
draw a
секундомер,
dial, put a
проставить
clock,
часы,
put a
поставить
dot,
галочку, дату
date of
рождения,
birth,
дату
ascendant,
абсцендент и
and
быстренько
quickly
сделать чек
calculate
и показать
everything, and
кому-то,
show someone what and at
кто
what
и
time
какой
to do
результат
right and at
правильно,
what
а
wrong.
какой
Thank you for your
неправильно.
attention.
Спасибо, коллеги, за
Olenka,
внимание.
thank you
Спасибо
for
за
the
вашу очень
opportunity to pass on
интересную
knowledge to
тему.
people.
Если есть
If you have
вопросы, коллеги,
questions, ask.
задавайте.
Thank you too. I also wrote everything to myself. And yesterday we talked about cyclicity with you. You know, yes, that through the numerologist I also calculate all this. I roughly estimated my cycles like this when you calculated them for me. They, in principle, fit into what I know. Now it remains for me to compare it, watch it, and in the near future, we will do it for the audience, which will help us calculate it all and will be happy for everyone. I believe that.
In any case, opportunities are really emerging, very serious opportunities. They just need to be taken into account.
Yes, this is important, because when a person plans his life, he should just understand at what point he will do something well, and he should understand why he is not doing it now.
Well, even banal here is a vacation. You should understand that if you go on vacation, for example, it is better for you to go on vacation somewhere in the south, during the period when you are on the decline, in order to support yourself energetically, in order not to overload yourself with something that can negatively affect either your health, or some decision made at the wrong time, erroneous, after which your life takes on a completely different course and not the color that you thought and dreamed of. That is a very important dependence. They just need to be understood and calculated.
Yes, and here's another picture. I remember this one, which is behind me. I think we will cover the topic of daily activities with you, because this is also such an interesting topic.
Me. Yes.
I remember how fascinated I listened to you then. This will also be a very interesting separate story.
Well, let's plan it next. The next broadcast will be devoted to the daily biological cycle of a person. It is fundamentally important for our energy system. In other words, it is very important for the health of our physical body, on which the quality of our thinking actually depends. So let's go. The next topic, the next broadcast will be devoted to this topic.
Great. Agreed. Valor, I sincerely thank you for the great benefit that you have given people today. And then what? We say goodbye until the next broadcasts.
Yes, if there are no such specific questions, then that's it. I hug everyone. I wish you good luck in everything. Review this broadcast a couple of times here. If you have any questions, write to the chat. And then Olenka and I will try to create as much as possible the conditions in which you will receive this information, and I hope it will be able to quickly and positively change your life.
Hooray.
Hooray!
Then that's it. Switching off, don't you press the stop button.
Yes.
You have control now.